will forget to do so. Helen Beatty, how are you? Welcome. So they have me starting for folks just popping on at 21 after the hour. So we're going to give another minute for people to figure out their technology. How's everyone doing while we're waiting? Looked like we had some technological big glitches of being able for everyone to be a part of the first part, but I'm sure it's recorded and so folks can have it for the future. All right, it is 21 after, and Jaden Deal is a taskmaster and said I should start right at that time. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Dana Mitra. I'm a professor at Penn State University, and I was asked today to lead a session on the early years. And so as folks are coming in, I think it probably is best that I will start with just a few slides to get us oriented, but it looks like hopefully we're a small enough group that we can have a conversation in this time and it's not just listening. So what I want to do is mainly just kind of give a conceptual idea and then we can have a chat about it, and they'll give another conceptual idea. We can have a chat about it. And if there are other issues or things that people want to talk about or questions, I am wide open to whatever it is that you are thinking about, and we can have that as a focus of conversation. So I'm going to share my screen as we get started. Is it sharing, everybody? Okay. So I'll start with, so I'm going to focus most of the ideas on the book on the right, which is a book I wrote with Tiffany C. We did a 5-year project looking at elementary school student voice in one main school here in central Pennsylvania. And out of that, we built a conceptual model for thinking about involving young people in student voice. I would say from the get-go, what we believe is, and is not certainly something that might be believed in the broader world, is that the youngest of young learners absolutely has the ability to be authentic agents in thinking about very challenging and difficult work. I was a part of a conference in Scotland a few years ago, headed by Kate Wall, who I'd be happy to connect you with, who was looking at student voice from birth to age 6. So how do we even have opportunities for pre-verbal kids to have agency? So there is scholarship along this notion from all levels. And some of the work that Stephanie and I have done includes looking at ways that kindergartners can talk about deep moral issues around what decisions around stealing, around race and class, and that I think some of our youngest learners are actually most open philosophically to exploring these issues because they haven't yet been constrained as to what they're supposed to think or say. So I want to focus just on 2 levels today, what student voice looks like in classrooms and in schools. And so I want to throw one initial idea out there for you of in the classroom around critical inquiry, and another term that we use a lot called youth participatory action research. So the notion of how can we construct our classrooms in ways that young people can ask questions that connect to big world issues that are happening in their schools, in their families, in their communities. So these images here, let me see if I can make it on a bigger screen here. That's actually, that's my daughter from 5 years ago. So I've been using this slide for a while. She's off to college in a couple weeks. but you can see on the bottom here different projects that we're engaged in. This was a middle school, but it can happen at any level. One young person decided that they wanted to explore in their school whether there should be more space in the schedule for independent reading time. This presentation here it was around dress code. And so the idea of youth participatory action research is encouraging our young people and our students to ask meaningful questions and to collect really strong data around what is happening and to be change makers. So there is a lot of this work that I think connects to work happening in the social studies world and also in civic education. So here are a few resources of other places that have models and frameworks and structures for classrooms around how to construct learning environments in which young people are gathering the tools necessary to ask meaningful questions about their world in a way that helps them to see the connection between themselves as change agents and ability to ask important questions and to lead to impact. So from that 5-year study, I'll give you a couple examples of what that looks like. And these may be school level, but they can happen in the classroom as well. So this was the elementary school in which we conducted our work. And one example was around milk bottles. So there were some 4th graders who noticed that students were drinking milk there for breakfast in the classroom, not in cafeteria settings, but there was not a structure in the school to recycle milk bottles in the classrooms. So they were getting thrown away with the garbage. So they decided to gather information on what would be necessary to have milk bottle recycling. And included everything from the math necessary to purchase buckets for each classroom to planning and organizing how students in that 4th grade would be responsible for gathering the recycling every day. And then to count up the milk bottles, again, as a part of math work, to think about how they were reducing the landfill by taking the recycling of milk bottles on as a responsibility, a community service of that 4th grade. This school also had what they called school-wide gatherings, which could just be considered assemblies, but the focus of school-wide gatherings at this school were student-run, and the oldest students in the school, the 5th graders, would run those meetings. So that was kind of a rite of passage of getting to the 5th grade to be the front of these meetings, not adults. And much of the focus of that work was sharing student work and ideas. Which is a very different way we think of what we usually do when we assemble students. So school-wide gatherings then became a primary space for student voice in terms of the running of the group, but also for classrooms and groups of students to share the work that was happening in the school. And so the principal at this school was very committed to having students as the front face of meetings as opposed to adults. This is the example from the school that got the most press, including being on the cover of Social Studies and the Young Learner. That group of young people were known as the Salad Girls. They were 5th graders at the time, and they turned to their 5th grade teacher and wondered why the Friday salad had to have meat and cheese on it. So you can see from this group of students, there was a Muslim student who couldn't have the meat. There was a lactose intolerant student who couldn't have the cheese. There was a vegetarian, and just someone who didn't want to have to do that. And so their initial idea was we should protest. And the principal and the 5th grade teacher work through with them what are the range of solutions to trying to make a policy change. They collected lots of data within their school about who would eat an alternative salad, and then they engaged in a much lengthier process than they expected of understanding what is the decision-making point at which this happens. It wasn't the principal, it wasn't the school level cafeteria people, it was the district cafeteria person. So just learning where change happens is a part of a curriculum of scaffolding student work in elementary school settings, and supporting them from behind to then they made a presentation to the district school lunch person who helped them to modify the salad at that level. And it got a lot of attention. The old white guy in that photo was the Secretary of Health for Pennsylvania, who came to recognize them for their work. And so a final piece, and then I want to have a discussion, is the idea of visible victories as a part of this work, I think, is really important. So how do we recognize and show the value that young people are doing of their work through things like having the Secretary of Health come, having cameras, even within a school, having the school-wide assemblies, so that there's signals to young people of the value of youth participatory action research, of critical inquiry, whatever we want to call it, of youth adult partnerships, of what it means to be a change maker, and how it's a public act and not just something that's happening in a classroom. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to go to gallery mode, and so I can see everybody. And I would love for anyone who has any thoughts, just raise your hand and I can call on you and you can share whatever it is that you would like to talk about with this time that we have. Or if you have questions too. Hi, David F. Brown. How are you?
I'm well. How about you, Dana?
Very good.
I just want to share just an example of what students can do in schools. I've been communicating and doing research with students at the Radnor School District near Philadelphia for years on where students design the curriculum in 8th grade. The entire curriculum for the year is based on their questions about what they want answers to, about their own personal lives and about the world around them. So just to let everyone know that the extensiveness of how far this can go with your example, which is an amazing one, to students gaining more control over what they're learning. And I think that's important, particularly as students rise through the middle level grades and into high school. Mm-hmm. That's all. Just want to let you know that.
That's awesome. Thank you. Anyone else have something? Helen.
You just bring up for me the always troubling statistic from Search Institute that I think it's more high school level. I'm not sure what the elementary school data is, but that 1 in 4 young people report feeling valued by their community. And when, yeah, and my guess is, like many of the statistics, there's more hope and it's not as depressing in the younger ages, but then we see this predictable trajectory. And you're talking about it needs to be public. Like, we need to find a way to make visible all these instances of capacity and desire, so that we change a mental model, because it's a mental model that doesn't believe young people desire or are capable of the things we know they are. And so I think it's, we need to do the work, but we need to do it plus be equally committed to that visibility, because that statistic needs to change. And I think it is, but less so with younger children. So even more important to get that word out. Mm-hmm. So just a thought.
That's lovely. Anything else that folks want to ask about or share? Or I would love to hear any work that's happening in your communities, or why you're stuck and want things to happen, but you're not sure what the next step is. This is a great time. I could talk to you about a lot of other things if you'd rather, but like you were just talked at for like an hour, so conversation is a good thing. Tiffany, is your?
Yeah, this is Tiffany. So I actually work for Iowa State University Extension and Outreach as a 4-H youth program specialist. So my previous work has been within school systems, but now I'm in out of school time with the 4-H program, primarily working with urban audiences. And so I guess my question would be, because it directly relates to our staff, the staff that is working kind of directly with youth, as well as volunteers, you know, which a lot of our programming is led through volunteers, but thinking of school systems, are there professional development resources or opportunities for those adults so that they can gain a better understanding about, you know, how to approach this kind of empowering, you know, youth and student voice, and kind of getting over that, you know, kind of adult-centric, you know, a perspective and attitude. So I didn't know if you had some resources or ideas or tools that you'd recommend.
Yeah, and let me tell you what, 4-H is one of the best out there. The extension offices, and I think particularly work led by Shep Zeldin, and folks who are affiliated with Shep Zeldin have done an enormous amount of thinking about 4-H in particular, and a youth adult partnership model in after school and you know, related programs of how adults can be better partners in this work. So the names that are doing a lot of that work are Linda Camino, Shep Zeldin, Calvert, and there are really great resource guides around how to be a better adult in a youth adult partnership that are actually even 4-H focused that I could send to you if you don't have access to. Ken Jones is a professor at the University of Kentucky who has done who is in the field of agricultural extension, who has done most of his work on youth adult partnerships and enabling a better relationship between youth and adults. So there's actually a lot of 4-H specific resources I could share with you. Getting to Yes by Julia Sheave is a publication around that. But I'll also turn to Helen because she just knows a lot about this as well. So.
Okay, that would be great. Yeah, thank you. And we, like you said, yes, that is definitely an emphasis and a part of our mission is youth adult partnerships. And so I see us doing a fairly good job of it, you know, at the middle and high school age. It's that younger, and you know, and with the Clover kids, K3, K5, that we're really trying to find new ways to do that. So, all right, Helen, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Dana. We've largely worked with middle and high school students as well on the organization Up for Learning, which is unleashing the power of partnership for learning. So very focused on this particular quest. We do have done a lot of work and are soon to produce a youth adult partnership module that is a compendium of activities that really bring people into a reflective place about their mental models about young people and their beliefs and power structures and decision-making structures that may need to shift. And so, although I think a lot of the work has assumed the background, the context of middle and high school, when you're talking about mental models, that's cross-age. And so going to the Up for Learning website and being able to pull some of those activities may be useful.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Lots of reading.
What was it again? Upper Learning?
It's Up UP for Learning. Yeah.
Oh, Up for Learning. Okay, thank you.
Put the link in the chat, Helen, so that folks can find it. That'd be great. Yeah, I agree that I think most of the resources are middle and high school level. That's partly why Stephanie and I wanted to do that research. And I think to some extent, it is the same principles at a different level with just more scaffolding, with just more, but with the still belief of putting young people forward. I think also the developmental difference might be like, what is impact, what is community, what is the world of a 5-year-old versus a 13-year-old. So it may be like their immediate community is where they conceptually understand that more. It really depends on the kid. I mean, I see a lot of really young people at Black Lives Matter protests right now, which just is wonderful. And it raises questions as to how the youngest people can access that experience as an activist, and how they're making sense of that and connecting that to their own lived experiences in their world. So I think there's a lot. The scaffolding is around whatever concept we put out there. How are we connecting it to a way that feels safe and meaningful and yet impactful, not just for whatever age that is, but whatever experiences that child has had as well. Is just kind of, it's in an individual process. But I would say, from the work we've done with kindergartners that Tiffany C did with preschoolers around gender roles, that there is that young people are very capable of talking about all the things that we as adults think about. They just need a container in which for that can happen. So for example, the work that Stephanie did in her dissertation around gender roles in a preschool involved this technique called Boelian theater, which sounds really fancy, but basically she would take pictures of young people in conflict around gender related situations, and then later bring the kids into a circle time and put the image of the conflict up on a screen and ask the kids to reenact that conflict with a space where everybody's giving input onto how they could do that better and what was really going on and what were people feeling and what would they choose to do differently. So that's an example of, there being kind of a really maybe problematic situation of one kid saying something hurtful, something that was, but then a space of intention around betterment that it created a safe space to talk through that we all make mistakes, but how can we do a better job? How can we lead towards a world in which we are trying to be kinder to one another? And that when we do mess up, we say sorry, and that we want to move forward as anti-racist, as anti-sexist, however we want to say these things. So she was doing that with ages 3 and 4. So that's just another example that can happen at a younger age, but the scaffolding might be more, and the idea of what community or impact will vary depending on those kids and what they're thinking about. Anything else coming up for folks? Yeah, Dave.
I just wanted to add a point that I've been writing recently about democracy and what happens in schools. And the idea behind public schooling originally was that it would be a way to inculcate our students into understanding their role in a democratic society. So from my perspective, the value of student engagement is that you start that process at an early age and you say to someone in kindergarten and second and fifth and eighth grade, you have a voice and you have a responsibility to use that voice, and we're going to show you how to do it. And so, I mean, that example you gave with the students in the salad situation is a perfect example of how they start to realize that their voice matters and they realize what it looks like and how to do it.
And that brings up the idea of trust for me too, of adults needing to show, depending on the environment, depending on the child, if they haven't been in trusting spaces where adults have shown up for them in the past. How do we show up as allies, as adults to young people, that there is a safe space for them to ask questions and that they will be listened to and not shut down and can be brought forward. So I think particularly as I think of the world in the past month around Black Lives Matters issues and things like that, of kids who have been shut down and not been allowed to talk about race in their classrooms or in their communities, or have had microaggressions happen against them, how to show up as an ally, that this is a space where we can talk about these things, how to teach young white kids how to be anti-racist, and that as we're learning and we say things that are hurtful, that it doesn't mean we're bad people, but we can be good people that make and that do things that hurt people. And how do we move forward from that is one part of the work that I think with younger children we need to be thinking about, and that that this movement right now can give us spaces for thinking about that on a range of issues right now, of how do we as adults model not just activism, but how do we model that we make mistakes and we move forward, and that we're vulnerable enough to show where we're struggling and that we don't have it all figured out, and that we need young people's help to do it better. That's what I'm thinking about a lot.
Yes.
Could I add something?
Please do. Hi.
I'm an elementary school counselor at an urban school that serves about 400 students, where about 90% of them are African American or Latino. And just a comment on what I'm listening today, what we've used to kind of help advocate for student voice and kind of get that into the foray of our school is looking at things with the social emotional lens, like anything SEL related, where they're focusing on, their self-management, self-awareness, their social awareness, responsible decision-making, those 5 core competencies that are published through CASEL. So using that as a tool for kindergarten through 5th grade students. And just what we've seen, like we haven't done any studies, but what we've seen just a shared vocabulary, because they're able to express their emotions, and then kind of taking that the next step to get them to have more voice. We try to begin with their interests and then see how those things relate to what they're doing in the classroom. So as an example, I love to share, one of my students two of my students actually had an interest in skateboarding. And I cannot skateboard for anything, but I did go out and get one so that we can have that moment. And over the 2 years we've had that, it started as 2 students at the lunch table talking about skateboarding. It has grown to an after school club. It's grown to them going into classes to show the connection between skateboarding and math, skateboarding and science. It's grown to being involved in the community, connecting with nonprofits that give out skateboards to kids across the community. So if you're working with young kids, what I found at my school is really starting with their interests and giving them that vocabulary to share so that they can work themselves into having that voice at the larger table.
That's awesome. And increasingly, we're trying to look at ways that research on student voice intersects with what we're, SEL is a social emotional learning at the younger levels, especially, it's just exploding right now. And there's so much intersection and overlap. They're getting all the funding and money, and we're not getting any right now. So that's another, if we hitch our wagon to that star, maybe student voice will have greater attention in the younger ages if we can show how much SEL is a set of things we're hoping to achieve, and student voice has been shown for sure with SEL and with civics as one of the best processes or avenues to get to those outcomes. And we need better work of practitioners showing us examples and of research to make that connection clearer, of like student voice being an avenue to SEL outcomes. Something I'm thinking a lot about. We have yes, please do, Christy. I was just about to say, we just have a few minutes left, so if folks who haven't spoken, please do.
So I'm just going to add on, because it seems to be just the thread of it. I work for the California PBIS Technical Assistance Center, so that's Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports, which is that framework that SEL fits into and all multi-tiered systems of support. But what it provides is that common language. And the common language is the values that the organization will embrace, but it's always been at the adult-centric level. It's what adults feel the values should represent. And so it's so important to have student voice at all ages, from preschool to high school, to be able to be the ones to have that authentic voice about what they value. And their language is so different. Their words are different. Respect means something so different for adults than it would be for different communities and students who live in different communities. So I just think it's a really nice commonality that keeps everything together, that if we can use students to represent what our values are, then we can pull in SEL and use those languages. So being respectful when we're engaging in escalating behaviors. What does that look like? And we can pull that in and teach it. And if we're doing that across all environments, the consistency and predictability for our kids is even more empowering, I think, for them to really get through these difficult situations. So that's all I have to add.
And that in itself can be a curriculum of having young people create their own language around what SEL outcomes are for, creating their own language around rules and shared norms for their spaces is incredibly powerful work in itself of building an understanding of how to create a community and how to create partnership that sometimes we feel like we don't have time to do because we want to move on to the content, but that's some of the most important content. Any other final thoughts? Otherwise, it's about time for us to move on. I was asked to put a lot of things in the resource folder for this breakout session. So I put a bunch of articles that we've worked on from our project around elementary school student voice work. And if you have any questions or are looking for resources, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm easy to find. I'll put my email in the chat, but it's just Dana@PSU. I'm at Penn State. Kay has posted in the chat the link we're supposed to use to go back, and hopefully that's a link where all 200 people can get in. So before you leave this session, please go to the chat here and make sure you're using that link to get us back, and we just have about 10 minutes of wrap up together. Thank you all. Hope to see you in person next year. We hope we will meet in person next year in Minneapolis. Hope to see you virtually at the Australian meeting. That looks like it's going to be happening in December virtually. And it looks like myself and 2 other colleagues are going to do like a webinar for everyone in September around state level ways that young people can influence state level policy. So stay tuned for more details about that. We didn't get them ready for this meeting, but otherwise off we go, and be sure to follow this new link.
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you.
Thank you.